Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have back with us Nick Bliss, who's a partner and financial advisor with Clear Strategy, and we'll be talking about legacy and estate planning. Nick, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, yeah, I always love when we can drill in deeper and learn more nuances about, the broad aspect of retirement planning, because there's about 38 bullet points and counting of aspects you need to keep in mind, and probably new things as well as people kind of dig in deeper. So let's start with what's the difference between legacy and estate planning, or are they exactly the same?
Yeah, they're very similar in likeness, but I think we look at it, at least from our vantage point, of saying, your estate planning is what you have now and where you want it left, where you want it, how you want that to look once you leave us. The legacy is more, what do you want it to maybe live on past you, right? So it's that other piece of what's, maybe there's a foundation started in your name, or maybe there's something bigger that lives beyond your lifetime. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell how we look at it, from two different aspects. A lot of similar planning goes involved, but again, two different thoughts. One kind of ends when you leave us, and the next one kind of lives on.
I guess the way you explain it there kind of makes sense. Like when you think about someone's estate. Like, well, that's all the, financial and the real estate, and well, that's estate planning. That's the tangible things, the stuff. And then legacy kind of gets into like your life legacy, your name, your, honoring, things that can carry on. So would it be, like you said, starting that foundation, or we want to fund the grandkids' college education so that legacy lives on through, through them. Yeah, that's a really good clarification. Good.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah, when you look at like Sam Walton, right? We all know the Walmart brand. That's his legacy, right? He left all that behind. Yeah. So, it's kind of that theory of maybe not quite as grand as that, but something up there that lives on much longer.
So where do you start? Like, isn't estate planning in reality, since that is the stuff and the tangible things, money and real estate, isn't that wrapped up in retirement planning? When I retire, I need to make sure I can live. But while I'm thinking about retirement, I need to think about the actual end. So, how will my estate be handled? So it's all intertwined, I would suspect.
Yeah, it really is, and it's something that people don't necessarily like to talk about this topic, but it's really very important, because we've seen good and bad. Unfortunately, the bad sometimes, you can be left with some hefty tax bills or hefty, other bills that were just left lingering, and somebody's got to clean it up. And who's going to be the one to clean it up, and how does it get cleaned up? And that's, kind of where that lies. So, yeah, for sure. I think it starts from retirement planning and kind of moves through it all. So.
Yeah. So it goes way beyond just, hey, Nick, you can talk to us about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and insurance. That's retirement type stuff. But we might need to bring in an attorney to look at the estate side of things. We might need to bring in a CPA to talk about potential aspects that way. And it kind of makes you think about bringing a whole team together, right?
Right. And that's exactly right. So we work strategic and we'll work with any attorney by all means. But we work with some strategic partners that are attorneys that we deal with day to day. We have a little stronger relationship and can kind of bounce some ideas off things, but it's quarterbacking that getting the trust in place, getting a will in place, getting power of attorneys in place, getting things so if something happens and you can't sign your own name, who's going to be able to, and how does that work, look, feel, right? So, it does. We just try and put that whole team together and try and keep that ball rolling for you, but bringing up those other topics like estate planning, legacy, trusts, wills, whatever, because we see it every day. We're in that business. And unfortunately, there's a lot of trust attorneys out there that write trusts and they write good product, but once the trust is done, nothing gets enacted. And sometimes they don't even get funded. They don't even get names changed on things. They don't get deeds done. So somebody kind of seeing that and helping you with that and guide you, because again, we do it every day. You as a consumer might only do it once in your lifetime, right?
Yes. So, yeah, that's a really great point. So let's kind of dive into two things you mentioned there is beneficiaries and the trust. Well, naming beneficiaries is crucial when you think about a will, but it also it ties into then that estate plan. So where do you want your stuff to go? And then it goes into legacy, because do we want to look at, like the legacy of your beneficiaries? So talk a little bit about naming beneficiaries and what goes into that.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. There's tax consequences that can play in. There's, minors can't, touch money till they're of age. So how does that look, work, feel? There's a lot of parts and pieces, because we never know when the end is going to be here, right? So we have to look at all those contingencies. And, it seems a little overwhelming, but, again, we're in the business to help everybody, and this is what we do. So we see some best practices, and then the other thing is a lot of times we suggest having that conversation with daughters, sons, and whoever's getting this money, so that they really know this is what you wanted done with it. Even though it's on paper, sometimes they question that. So we've had multiple times where we'll have a sit down, mom and dad, all the kids, the attorney, myself, maybe a CPA, and it's a big meeting of here's what it looks like when we're not going to be here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not a fun meeting. I mean, we try and make it as fun as you can be, but ultimately it's getting that out in the air now, and so people aren't blindsided and cause havoc later.
Well, I would suspect that yes, it's not fun, but it is a complete gift that you're giving to the family.
Right.
I mean, really is. You know how you feel like when you're all over the place and scattered, and then if you sit down for 20 minutes and plan out the rest of your week, and it's like, okay, all that stuff kind of fit into that time block here, that time. Okay, I can do that. It's like that feeling of relief. Well, this is a gift you're giving your family in planning ahead. So talk a little bit about that trust, funding the trust, and are there some states that a trust is more beneficial than others? Is a trust always a good idea?
Yeah, great questions. To touch on, is it always a good idea? Not always, but we have some criteria that some thresholds that are set, at least that we've kind of come up with attorneys that we work with, of course. This is kind of the threshold of where we feel a trust probably is right for you, and then we enact on what that looks like and feels like. So. Certainly, every state does vary a little bit. Some due to taxation, estate tax type stuff. They're all kind of have their own nuances, but most places trusts are probably the best case for most. If in a nutshell, if you own a house and have some monies and have some details, it's probably worth having a trust, just to kind of simplify some thoughts.
Yeah, mainly because in the certain states that have probate, then the trust keeps it out of that, so it just keeps it nimble, and the heirs and the trustees can just go, okay, here's what they wanted, and move forward, and without getting into details of taxes, who knows what that situation is, but just the trust keeps it right, nice and crisp and clean and easy to deal with.
Exactly. And it really does define where you want your stuff to go versus, here, you're in charge, and, I kind of wanted this, but whatever, right? You can't ask them again. So it puts it on paper,
Yeah.
And then we always catalog trust for clients. We keep a copy if at all possible, give them an electronic file, and also give them, if we can, scan it in so that they can store it in a couple places so that people can find it. And then, point of contact to us or the attorney, at least, to get ball rolling should something happen. So,
Yep. So we talked about like investing for retirement. There's a lot of options, and that's 28 conversations about that. It's really deep and detailed. But investing for legacy takes on a whole different mindset, because it's almost like you think about the tombstone, born here, died here. Well, legacy, there's no end date because the legacy continues on. So talk a little bit about how investing for legacy is a little bit different of a perspective. Like you might think of 30,000 foot view. Well, investing for legacy might be a 90,000 foot view.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, with that, there's some pieces, there's some vehicles that are out there built for that, right? Annuities, some life insurance policies, different things that enhance that death benefit so that it maybe funds a piece that lives on past you, or maybe that foundational piece or something. And then maybe I work with a foundation that they're allowed to spend up to 90% of any year's annual profits, and they give it away to little leagues and different stuff around the local area. But again, it was set up years and years, decades ago, and it doesn't really matter what the dollar value is. It's only spending percentage of profits, right? So on profitable years, they can give away X, and when it's not so profitable, they can only give away Y. But again, when you're building that type of thought, what's that piece look like? Are you going to leave a couple 100,000? Are you going to leave a $500,000? Whatever that number is for that legacy, what that's going to look for. But again, the conservative nature kind of doesn't disappear, but you kind of take it off the plate because you want this to live on past you.
Right.
You don't want this for the next 5 or 10 years. You want this for the next 30. So it's almost like you're starting your 401k over again.
Yeah.
And you're kind of aggressive because you're looking at this to be, 50 years maybe, right? Where in your 20s, when you start your 401k, you're pretty aggressive for that reason, right? You got lots of time on your side. Well, so does this legacy piece.
That's a good point.
That piece looks different than what.
Yeah, you could be sitting down with your financial professional, pulling out your statements for your retirement portfolio, looking at the allocations and your age. Let's just pick 55. Well, your risk tolerance will look way different if you then close that folder and open up the next folder, which is your legacy planning portfolio. Now the risk tolerance might be completely different because there's no true end in sight. It's kind of like ongoing. And I think that's a mental mindset that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, it's two different looks, really. It's and sometimes hard to get that through people's minds because it is different, and we all have some conservative natures to us, but when you're looking further down the road than that, it's a piece that, and how do we get that pile to grow as much as we can so you can do as much with it as you want. If you're leaving it for legacy and you're leaving it to fund whatever's passionate to you, you want it to be as big as it can be, and you want to give as much as you can from that, right? So
what are some of the tools that would be used for legacy planning? Because I've heard the phrase charitable remainder trust. Is that one of the tools that could be an option?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's an option. There's foundations are options to build on. It depends on how big you're talking and what that legacy looks like. If you're leaving some money to a fire department in your name, maybe it's just 20 grand. If you're leaving, a foundational piece that's going to fund something for kids or something passionate to you, that could be a couple 100,000, maybe $1 million, whatever that looks like. So different pieces of vehicles that are available to do that, and then how do we fund it? And so that's the other piece. So, sometimes it's life insurance, right? So, is there $1 million living trust life insurance? So that's, when it comes through, it comes, when you pass on, it comes to the trust as that piece to move on past you. And that becomes a irrevocable piece of the trust that, somebody can manage. The trustees will have access to manage to your wishes, of course, but, again, a lot of different avenues to look down that.
Yeah, and you mentioned like giving to something like a firefighter or funding something. So the firefighter might be like your passion that you retired from the fire department. So here's this
Right.
gift of X, but you might also be associated with a school and want to give scholarships. Hey, I
Right.
want once a year our trustee to find a worthy recipient and give whatever $5,000 to the worthy recipient from our trust. Well, then the vehicle would be very critical, because if you put it into some type of qualified plan, for instance, then it's like, oop, can't get that easily, or there's consequences. So that has to be thought out. And that's where
Sure.
someone like yourself would say, oh, if you want it to do that, here then are the options that keep it liquid,
Right.
accessible, and all of that.
Yeah, and then it obviously has to be spelled out in the plan so that everybody knows what vehicles could be used to accomplish these goals, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's talk about that. What would be let's think of like an example, like if someone wanted to fund like scholarships for, the school that they were associated with ongoing for years to come.
Sure.
What would some of those potential options be that they could consider?
Sure. I would look, generally speaking, once that money is there and the pile is there, then you kind of become a little more conservative to it, right? Because now it's got to produce that income, say, or percentage that's going to be gifted, and how that looks. So then we, kind of reverse engineer that number. If you're trying to get to $5,000 a year at whatever, say 3 to 5%, what does that number equate to? What do we have to have in the pile so that the pile never really shrinks? It just keeps going. So, we may look at some fixed income options. Right now, interest rates are going up. So there's some nice vehicles there that's giving some decent returns today versus 3 or 4 years ago when that wasn't something to speak about. If you're a more risk averse type person, you may look at saying, you know what, I've done really well with X stock, and that dividend is great, and I would just soon have some of it in dividend producing pieces. Maybe it's an annuity piece that just spits off some sort of annual guaranteed piece. So just some different vehicles that are out there. And each case is obviously, independent of others, but certainly some similarities between them.
Yeah. Well, and I think the bottom line is you need to probably have several if-then scenarios. Like, well, if you want to fund this, then here's 2 or 3 options. Okay, now let's really drill in deep and go, if you looked at option 1, here would be some of the, pros and cons. And there's going to be cons, not like horrible, you should never do it type of a con, but there might be like, well, here's some considerations. Like, maybe that's
Right.
one of the derivations of that word. It's not really like con, no, don't do it, but just consider this. If you did this type of a tool, then it would require blah, 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 whatever that might be.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
it's, ease of access. And if it's like the scholarship scenario, well, you need to have at least, 2 weeks before you could access the funds because you have to request it in writing. Oh, well, if that's not a problem, then that's just something to know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, who's managing it? Obviously, we're involved today, but if somebody chooses somebody differently down the road, those things all have to be spelled out for the person who doesn't have that conversation today, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, you definitely got to have a lot of parts and pieces, and stair steps in place. And again, all things we work on over time. It's not something that needs to take time, but most of the time on this type of stuff, we would have, an annual review with the client just based on that piece alone, and not about anything else. It's just, here's where this is, and here's what this looks like if you were to leave us today. Does that still fit your plan? Right. And
so this brings up
out there.
I know I touched on this a minute ago, but have you ever worked with a client that, was like, okay, I know I need to look at, retirement, and then they start sitting down with you, and then one of the boxes, the check is estate/legacy planning, and they're like, oh, well, isn't that just part of our retirement conversation? Yeah, maybe, but we need to dive a little deeper into, and what we just talked about here. My question is, what have your clients told you at the end of meetings, several meetings, because it's not just one quick meeting, but when they can check the box off to go, we have exhausted and polished up fully our estate and legacy plan, and they breathe this sigh of relief and go, Nick, this has been clarity, and what a relief. I didn't even know it was a burden on my shoulder, but what a relief to know that this is taken care of.
Yeah, definitely. We see a lot of success stories such as that. When we get across that finish line to say, at least we have something on paper. It's ever changing, things we can't generally set it and forget it when it comes to this stuff. But when you sit down and go through it, and they make them think about it, and they go through all the process and steps and stairs, most of the time it's a big thank you, because they didn't realize what it entails, right? And if you're 50, 55, 60, you may not have gone through your parents' stuff yet.
Yeah.
So, having that conversation with you generally sparks the conversation with you to your parents and the next gen up to say, what do you guys got? Because we just went through this and it's a huge undertaking. Where do we stand with you and your stuff? Because they're going to have to deal with it at some point too, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, it's multiple levels of looking at these things, but certainly, 10 out of 10 times clients are like, wow, we bring up the legacy, we bring up the estate, we bring up the trust, we bring up funding the trust, beneficiaries of the trust, how that looks. Everybody looks to save and retire, but if you've done the saving and the retirement planning properly, you should have a pretty good pile to leave to people. Yeah. So where's that going to go next?
Yep, exactly.
And how do you want it to go next?
Yeah, and I guess the word gift comes up. When you have the gift of clarity, that someone like Nick helping you talk through that, that's a gift of clarity. And then you're giving the gift of clarity to your beneficiaries, family, with this plan to sit down with them to go, let me just lay out for you guys, quick family meeting, let's all jump on a Zoom or whatever. In fact, last night we had a family meeting with our kids spread all across the country. And it's just, that's what we do these days, is have a family meeting and we go virtual. But to be able to give your family that gift of, here's what we've done, and here's this path forward, and we want to talk about legacy, we want to talk about how things will move forward, and I think that's just such a wonderful gift. So Nick, I tell you, we've touched on several things here that are so crucial on that legacy and estate planning. If someone is listening to this saying, let's just take a peek at mine, what's the best way they can learn more and then also reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. Be happy to talk to anybody, sit down, have that initial contact. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a Zoom, maybe it's face-to-face. In today's world, we have a lot of different avenues, but certainly you can find us. Our website is www.myclearstrategy.com. On there, you can find me or any of the partners or any of the other advisors. We all work as a team, so certainly reach out. You can get started there. Phone numbers are there. Social media is all there. Facebook, LinkedIn. We're pretty readily accessible, or hope to be.
Excellent. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming back on. It was a real pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Thanks.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.